Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock, Drogheda. There's a few problems at Dublin Airport at the minute. Apparently, the local council, Fingal County Council, has set a limit for how many flights can operate out of Dublin Airport at night time, how many takeoffs and landings. And it turns out that they're exceeding that amount. Part of that is because of how they calculate nighttime. The local council is saying they're talking about after 11 p.m. and before 7 a.m. And some of the airlines and Dublin Airport themselves would rather that they calculated it as after midnight and before 6 a.m. because there's a great demand for early morning flights. And it's understandable, because if you're traveling somewhere in Europe, as I quite frequently am, and you're going to a conference or an event where you have to be there lunchtime, early afternoon, because of the time difference, because remember most places in Europe, whenever it's like 7 a.m. in Ireland, there's already 8 a.m. there. So if you're wanting to get somewhere in Europe in time for a conference or an event that starts lunchtime, early afternoon, you've got to get those early flights. And I've lost count of how many times I've been, for example, on a 5:50 a.m. flight out of Dublin Airport, which is murder to get up for, because you've basically got to be at the airport for 4 a.m., which means I've got to get up before 3 a.m. at home in order to make that 5:50 flight. But there's no other way of doing it. And if you don't catch that early flight, you've got to fly out the day before. You've got to stay in a hotel. It all becomes much more time consuming and expensive. So I understand why there's so much demand for those early morning flights. But I do also understand as well people who are struggling to sleep, and there's planes taking off all the time because they live near the airport. Now, one thing that did come to light, a friend of mine sent me a report that this wasn't in the Irish press. He actually, my friend is a missionary in Belgium, and he sent me a report that apparently one individual is responsible for 90% of all the complaints made about noise at Dublin Airport. In fact, during 2021, this one individual submitted 23,431 official complaints. That's a lot of complaints. That means that on an average day, 365 days a year, they make 65 official complaints a day about the noise of planes at Dublin Airport. That is a lot of complaining. In fact, when my friend sent me that report, I immediately replied to him and said, I think that person, I probably met him at church one time, because I've met some people in churches that like to complain a lot as well. Now, complaining in itself isn't wrong. There are times when something has inconvenienced you, when something was promised to you and was not done, when something was done in a wrong way or an illegal way or in an unethical way or whatever that has hurt you or hurt others. You have a right to complain about that. That's perfectly good. Society used to discourage, for example, whistleblowers, people within an organization that would highlight illegal things that were happening. They would often lose their jobs. Now, there's laws and protections for whistleblowers that they can point out and complain when things are being done wrong. So complaining in itself is not wrong. But I would suggest if you're complaining about the same thing 23,000 times or 23,000 times in a year, then you're complaining too much. And when you become known as a complainer, that's when there is a problem. You see, the Bible condemned complainers and grumblers, like the children of Israel were condemned for their grumbling and complaining in the wilderness, not because it's wrong to complain, but because they did it all the time and it became part of their character and that became who they were. As Christians, there are times when we have to speak out against what is wrong, but let's make sure that we don't just become known as the people who are complaining all the time. Those people, they're always complaining anyway, because eventually when you get known as the person who complains all the time, people stop listening to your complaints. I will say this, that as a pastor, there are certain people in our churches that if that person were to complain, I would take it very seriously indeed, because I know they are not naturally complainers. And I will give their complaint much more weight than the person who's always complaining and complains 23,000 times a year. So we have a right to complain, but let's not be complainers. in Jesus' name. God bless you today. Join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.